It is a process. We also call it a diagram. Let's read the question first. It appeared on 15th August 2023 in the real exam. Now the question over here says, the diagram below describes the process of making recycled paper. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Let's understand how should such questions be attempted. The very first thing that you need to understand when you are given a process on the day of exam is the kind of grammar that you are going to use while writing a report on this kind of diagram. So the major tense that is going to play a role over here is going to be simple present tense. And what kind of simple present tense? Not active voice. You will be using the passive voice of simple present tense. We will see very shortly what kind of language plays the role when we talk about passive voice of simple present tense. Another thing that you need to always remember when you are writing a report on a diagram is that you cannot miss any single feature. You have to describe all the nitty-gritties that you are getting to see over here. All the nitty-gritties, all the intricacies. And finally, you have to follow the structure. Now, what exactly is the structure of IELTS Writing Task 1? You will have to write 4 paragraphs, which is must. Your paragraph number 1 is going to be the introduction paragraph, where you do nothing. You only rewrite the information that is given to you in the question, but you rewrite that in your own words. We call that paraphrasing statement. So you will paraphrase the information given in the prompt. The second step is going to be your overview paragraph, which is incredibly vital. It is absolutely vital for you to write the overview paragraph. And what exactly goes into it? You are going to summarize the entire diagram here. Summarize as in you are going to write about the entire diagram in brief. That means starting from the very first step, that is making pulp, to the last step, that is recycle paper. You will talk about the entire thing, but you will not elaborate. You will talk about the entire thing in probably 2 to 3 steps only. So it has to be brief. And then third paragraph is going to be your body paragraph 1. Now here in body paragraph 1 and finally the body paragraph 2, in these 2 paragraphs, you write down the intricacies that you see in this process. You write down the nitty-gritties, all the steps that you are getting to see over here, unfiltered pulp, conveyor belt. You will talk about each and everything. So this is the structure that you must follow. Let's see our paragraph number 1. That is the introduction paragraph. How exactly we have written that paragraph on this process. So you look at the introduction paragraph. It says over here, the given diagram represents how paper is recycled. The very first thing, please look at the length of introduction paragraph. It is just 1 single sentence. When you are writing a report on a process, this is how your introduction paragraph will look like. Just the paraphrase statement and absolutely crisp. Please remember, you are not going to write anything else in the introduction paragraph. If you do, that will be taken as fluff. That will only eat up your time and will not help your band score. So stick to only the paraphrase statement in your introduction paragraph and nothing else. Now, some other words that you can use instead of represents, you can say the given diagram depicts. You can also say the given diagram illustrates. So you can use different verbs over here, and the diagram, this can also be paraphrased as process. The given process depicts how paper is recycled. So these are some words that you can use in your paraphrasing statement. And paraphrasing statement will always begin like this. The given diagram represents, the given bar chart represents. This is how you will always begin the paraphrasing statement, as simple as that. Let's move to the overview paragraph, where we are going to see that how exactly we have summarized this entire process, this thing here, in short, simple steps. Let's see the overview paragraph. So we are not going to talk about the nitty-gritties in the overview paragraph. Let's see how we have done that. Here you go. So it says, overall, it can be clearly seen that the whole process is divided into several steps. Firstly, used paper is converted to pulp, which is then filtered and cleaned, and the process ends with the production of the finished goods, which is recycled paper. Let's understand what we have done over here. For a smooth beginning of your overview paragraph, use this kind of language. Overall, it can be clearly seen that. And then to keep your ideas connected, just see the kind of language we are using. This transition linker, firstly, for our first step. We are saying, firstly, used paper is converted to pulp. Remember, I talked about passive language, passive voice in simple present tense. What is the structure of passive voice in simple present tense? The structure is we use is-mr plus the third form of verb or the past participle. This third form of verb is also known as past participle. And see this language here. Used paper is converted. Is plus V3. So firstly, used paper is converted to pulp. And then comes another linker, which is then. Now we are coming to our second step, filtered and cleaned. So look here, making pulp, then it is filtered, and then it is cleaned. And the process ends with, that means now we are talking about the final step. It ends with the production of the finished goods, which is recycled paper. So which is again your transition linker. So look at the language that we are using to keep our ideas connected, and look at the grammar. We are using passive voice in simple present tense, and the beginning is absolutely smooth with this kind of phrase. Overall, it can be clearly seen that. If you notice, we have not talked about all the other nitty-gritties that are there in this process. We have not talked about these intricacies yet. In the overview, if you talk about these nitty-gritties, that will go against you. So these nitty-gritties have to be answered, have to be elaborated only in the body paragraphs. Let's see how exactly we have written our body paragraph 1. So it says here, the process begins with used papers being placed on a conveyor belt in order for them to be transferred to a vessel. So if you see here, we have got this conveyor belt and we have got used paper over here. And then they are being transferred to this vessel. That is exactly what we have written in the first step. Let's read this once again. It says the process begins with, look at the language for first step. The process begins with used papers being placed on a conveyor belt in order for them, this is your transition linker, in order for them to be transferred to a vessel. Moving on, we are saying water and chemicals are then added. Again, passive voice, are plus the third form of verb. Water and chemicals. If you see here, water and chemicals are then added to the vessel so that pulp can be made. If you see, we are talking about this pulp step. This pulp is filtered in the next step to remove impurities. Look at the language, is filtered. Again, is plus the third form of verb, that is passive voice. In passive voice, we tell how something is done. In active voice, we tell how we do something. Now here, we don't know who is doing all these steps. That is why we are using passive voice. So once again, this pulp is filtered in the next step to remove impurities. So if you see here, it is being filtered. The filtered pulp is then transferred to a different container to be cleaned further. Again, look at the language, is then transferred. The filtered pulp is then transferred. So if you see, this is your filtered pulp and this is being transferred to this vessel to remove further impurities. How exactly we do that? This necessitates the addition of more water along with soap to the pulp. So if you see here, water and soap are being added to further clean it. And look at the language. We are saying this necessitates. That means this makes it necessary. This makes it compulsory to add more water along with soap. Again, a linker over here to add more water along with soap to the pulp. Besides. Now, besides is also your linker. It means also or in addition to. Besides, air is also pumped into the container. So if you see this air pump, it is being pumped into the container which ultimately result in the removal of ink. So this ink, we have got this outward arrow, which is telling us that by adding water and soap and pumping some air, the ink is removed. That is how it is cleaned further after the filtering step is done. So we have more or less talked about making pulp. Till now, we have talked about filtering step and we have reached our cleaning step. The remaining information, this transferring it to the final step, that will be talked about in the final paragraph. Let's see how we have done that. But before that, let's take a look at the passive voice that is being used over here. Water and chemicals are then added. So are plus the third form of verb. So if you see, everywhere in this report, you will find past participle. That is the third form of verb with is or are. Water and chemicals are then added to the vessel so that, this is your linker, so that pulp can be made. This is again your passive voice. A modal verb plus be plus past participle. Again, is filtered, is plus V3 in the next step. So this is how you are keeping your ideas connected and you are using right grammar. Next step is taking you towards the next step. The filtered pulp is then transferred. Again, is plus transferred is plus V3. This necessitates the addition of more water along with soap to the pulp. Besides, air is also pumped. Again, is plus pumped into the container, which ultimately results in the removal of ink. So it's very important to understand the grammar that is being used in this kind of process, along with the linkers that we are using to keep our ideas connected. Let's move to the last paragraph over here. So we are saying in the final step, the clean pulp thus acquired is transferred into heated rollers. Now, if you see this clean pulp, here you go, thus acquired is transferred into heated rollers. Here you have got your heated rollers so that, this is again your linker, so that excess water. So if you see, this excess water is being removed so that excess water can be drained. Look at the vocabulary also. Excess water can be drained. The final product, which is rolls of recycled paper, is obtained in the end. This is the final product, which is the rolls of recycled paper, is obtained in the end. So we have pretty much described each and every intricacy that we are getting to see in this graph, in this process. But how exactly? Let's take a look at the grammar also over here. The clean pulp thus acquired, this is a linker, is transferred, again passive voice, is plus V3, is transferred into heated rollers so that, we have a linker here, so that excess water can be drained. Again, passive voice, a modal verb plus be plus the third form of verb. The final product, this is telling the examiner that we are now at our final step. The final product, which is, so if you see, at so many places we are using this linker, which is a great linker and is converting this sentence into a complex one. So the final product, which is rolls of recycled paper, is obtained. Again, is plus V3, is obtained in the end. So throughout, passive voice is being used. How exactly? Is plus are and past participle, that is the third form of verb. Now, if we put this together, how exactly this report will look like, let's take a look at that. Now, again, look at the length of introduction paragraph. And remember, you will only paraphrase the information given in the prompt. You will not write anything else. If you do, that will become fluff. That will only eat up your time. So it says over here, the given diagram represents how paper is recycled. The overview paragraph, which is the star paragraph. Let's see how we have done that. It can be clearly seen that the whole process is divided into several steps. Firstly, used paper is converted to pulp, which is then filtered and cleaned, and the process ends with production of the finished goods, which is recycled paper. So it's very clear that what is our first step, what is our last step, and what is our second step, which is then filtered. So it's very clear. Why exactly it's clear? Because the kind of linkers that we are using. And once again, we are not elaborating the intricacies in the overview paragraph. We are summarizing the entire process in brief in the overview paragraph. If you write too much in the overview paragraph, it will go against you. Now coming to body para 1, where we have nitty-gritties, we are saying the process begins with, step number 1, the process begins with used papers being placed on a conveyor belt in order for them to be transferred to a vessel. Water and chemicals are then added. Are then added is passive voice, and at the same time is telling us that this is our next step. Are then added to the vessel so that pulp can be made. This pulp is filtered in the next step. This is our third step. This pulp is filtered in the next step to remove impurities. The filtered pulp is then transferred to a different container to be cleaned further. So all these words, next step, is then transferred. The process begins with, this is how we have kept it connected. This necessitates the addition of more water along with soap to the pulp. Necessitates means this makes it compulsory. This makes it necessary to add more water along with soap to the pulp. Besides, that means in addition to, besides, air is also pumped into the container, which ultimately means finally. So sort of telling the examiner that we are reaching towards the final stages, which finally results in the removal of ink. Here, in the final step, the clean pulp thus acquired is transferred into heated rollers. Now, this is the final step, pretty much clear for the examiner to understand that the clean pulp thus acquired is transferred into heated rollers so that excess water can be drained. I am underlining all the linkers that we have used here and all the passive voice verbs that we have used here, so that excess water can be drained. Again, passive voice. The final product, which is rolls of recycled paper. The linker here is which. The final product, which is rolls of recycled paper, is obtained in the end. So the final step is written in the beginning. Obtained in the end is written towards the end of the sentence, which is making it absolutely clear that this is the final step of the process. So this is how you need to keep your ideas connected if you want a high band score on coherence and cohesion criterion, because coherence and cohesion criterion is all about the structure and keeping your ideas together, well put together, using linkers wherever they are required. Let's talk about some important points to remember. Now, if you want a high band score on your coherence and cohesion criterion, you have to use linkers such as moreover, however, on the contrary, although, and so on. Now, one problem while using linkers is that sometimes students go overboard with them. That is one problem. You need to keep one thing in mind, that you are going to use linkers wherever they are required. You will not forcefully bring them in every single sentence, even if they are not required. Another thing that you need to understand is you need to use linkers flexibly. You cannot use these words in the beginning of every sentence. Sometimes you have to use them in the beginning. Sometimes you should be using them in the middle of two sentences. And sometimes, if possible for you, use them towards the end of a sentence also. That is how you will be able to show some flexibility in your language. Remember that. Next, take care of spellings and punctuation. If your spellings are incorrect, it will affect your vocabulary score negatively. And what are punctuation errors? Errors related to full stops, comma, caps letters, and small letters. You should know exactly which letter you should begin, exactly which word you should begin with a capital letter. That you should know. Otherwise, you will be ending up making a punctuation error, which will affect your grammar score negatively. Take care of grammar. Now, talking about grammar, today we discussed process. And when we write a process, when you write a report on process, like I told you earlier, we have to use simple present tense in passive voice. But what about the other charts? If you are getting a bar graph, line graph, pie chart, will you still use simple present tense in passive voice? Well, you need to be a little careful here in task 1, because the grammar varies. Sometimes you will have to use simple present tense, sometimes you'll have to use past, Sometimes you'll have to use future, and at times you have to use all the tenses together, all three tenses as in present, past, future. So be careful of the grammar, read the question carefully, only then you will understand that exactly which tense should be used while writing a report on that prompt. And lastly, and most importantly, cover all the requirements of the task. Don't leave any points. I will restate this. Don't leave any points, especially if you are writing a report on a process. You have to talk about all the nitty-gritties. You cannot simply miss a couple of steps. If you do, the task achievement score will go down. You have to elaborate all the nitty-gritties, all the intricacies that you are getting to see in the diagram. So this is something that you should not forget. And with that, we'll be wrapping it up. But for more such meaningful content, please follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we'll be posting such content regularly. Thank you very much, guys.